In the late 20th century, the United States ruled as one of two superpowers on the global stage. To combat its rival, the communist stronghold in the East, the Soviet Union, it invested heavily into the Department of Defense, where it bolstered and birthed agencies capable of combating this threat in order to secure U.S. foreign interests abroad. Then, others to secure domestic interests. Alongside the FBI would come the CIA, NSA, and DEA. The four agencies would collectively make up the cabal known as the Gang of Four, headed by an inner circle of the NSA. By the late 1990s, the event known as the collapse was in full swing in America. In the decades following, the Western states would break away, millions would become homeless, and martial law would be all that held the remnants of the federal government together. Hello there, and welcome to another Cyberpunk 2077 lore video, where we explore the fall and rebirth of America. In the late 1990s, the Gang of Four were largely responsible for America's sudden decline. Their hacking of European and Asian stock markets, as well as inflating the value of the American dollar, came to light in 1994. Consequently, it was also during a time where the United States had become involved in the First Central American War, a great economic strain on the country. This period would become known as the Crash of '94, when developed countries around the world conducted a trade embargo on the United States. By August 17, 1996, the period of the collapse had begun, when one of the cornerstones of the Gang of Four, the NSA, assassinated the president and vice president. With the Speaker of the House incapacitated and the President pro tempore of the Senate refusing the position, the mantle of power fell to Secretary of Defense Stewart. His 3 o'clock address to Congress would signal the beginning of the end for the United States. Suspecting external involvement on both Europe and the attack on the federal government, Stewart declared martial law. In doing so, the Constitution was suspended, and the government transferred power to an emergency military government. With power transferred to the military, Stewart then established the Military Intelligence Cooperative, where several theoretical mathematicians in the military intelligence community began to note a number of suspicious activities and inconsistencies, leading them to suspect that various government agencies were operating in tandem. They'd discover a trail that would lead to the shadow government of the Gang of Four, which began targeting MIC officials. While these operations were being conducted, Stewart, with units of Central Command positioned around the Capitol, issued a single change to the government that would save the United States from descending into anarchy. It would be the creation of regional committees. Originally a concept of the MIC, these regions would be certain areas of the U.S. that could be effectively grouped by certain boundaries. Each region would contain a major military base for each of the armed forces for better governing and resource distribution. While these efforts were ongoing, the United States was still conducting operations abroad. The NSA specifically was conducting operations in the Middle East. By 1997, the Mideast Meltdown, also known as the Suicide War, had erupted. It would be a military conflict fought between Iraq and Iran. At the time, the NSA operated over 300 agents in the area. When the war broke out, the NSA failed to inform the MIC and additionally withheld photos of military intelligence for 2 hours. Left in the dark about the events on the other side of the world, the MIC was unable to inform U.S. military assets in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait of the pending conflict. As a result, old Russian military carriers operated by one of the nations moved into position and detonated thermonuclear warheads, wiping out all of U.S. military assets in the region. Radioactive fallout spread across Iran, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Chad, and the Arab Emirates. The price of oil skyrocketed, further hastening the decline of the already collapsing United States. The withholding of intelligence from the Military Intelligence Committee by the NSA sparked the first investigations into the Gang of Four. President Stewart ordered these investigations himself, but it was just the beginning of problems for the fading superpower. Just a year later, terrorist factions bombed airports, factories, freeways, and mass transit terminals across the nation. A period of drought, known as the Drought of '98, reduced the Midwest to parched grasslands, imperiling the U.S. food supply and ending the family farm. That same year, a 10.5 quake struck Los Angeles, killing an estimated 65,000 people and covering the city in 35% of water. As the close of the 20th century loomed, the shadows of digital specter began to emerge, named the Y2K problem. This seemingly potential issue was alternatively known as the Y2K scare, millennium bug, and various other epithets, centered on a fundamental flaw in computer design. For decades, systems had abbreviated 4-digit years to their last 2 digits. This design shortcut, while efficient, rendered the year 2000 indiscernible from 1900. With the world deeply embedded in the digital age, this computational ambiguity threatened to destabilize infrastructures reliant on precise date computations. In the twilight years of the millennium, a growing public consciousness of this digital dilemma unfurled. Projections on the potential fallout varied dramatically, with estimates suggesting that anywhere from 400 million to a staggering 600 billion would be necessary to neutralize the threat. The haze of uncertainty surrounding the Y2K problem birthed a wave of paranoia. Tales of citizens hoarding essentials, procuring backup power sources, and withdrawing vast fortunes from banks painted a vivid picture of a society bracing for a digital Armageddon. Fear of Y2K led to the formation of millennium cults, resulting in mass orgies of suicide and violence on January 1st, 2000. At the same time, climate change resulted in massive firestorms that raged over the northwestern United States, destroying millions of acres of farm and grassland. Just prior to these events, in 1999, the world began experiencing a series of epidemic disasters that devastated the planet. While these events are due to the effects of climate change, some of them were bioengineered by various nations around the planet. The dominant of viral pathogens became known as the wasting plague. The wasting plague was a horrible infection that attacked the intestines of the victim and made them starve to death no matter how much food they ate. Initially, the plague began in Europe, but a year later, it would finally reach the United States. The virus rapidly spread thanks to densely packed urban areas and a willful tendency for broken governments to downplay medical emergencies. With the military government battling the Gang of Four, the plague was ignored, killing roughly 14 million people before a vaccine was developed in Japan. In 2002, Stewart, the Secretary of Defense, was assassinated by a joint CIA and NSA operation hidden under the disguise of a riot. The chairman of Joint Chiefs, General William Newell, succeeded him. Amidst the chaos, the Gang of Four released yet another plant-based bioengineered virus, which wiped out Canadian and Soviet crops. In a dose of luck, the U.S. agribusiness crop survived thanks to a new biological counteragent. The USSR accused the United States of biological warfare, souring relations with the U.S. and the USSR ally, the European Economic Community. For a short time, order returned to the United States. In this grace period, the Department of Defense and the DEA once again turned to Central America. Despite the American absence, the drug lords continued battling one another. The DEA hoped their ongoing conflict would have depleted much of their forces. A renewed confidence in American firepower also came with the arrival of new military units, equipped with AVs, and the beginning of the cyber soldier. All that was needed was the war's legitimacy. It was declared that the drug lords were still a threat to the U.S. economy. In reality, most drugs on the U.S. market were purely artificial designer narcotics, manufactured domestically. The world viewed this aggression as a way for the United States to take additional territory on a 20th century act of conquest. Holding this territory would grant the United States a solid hold over the entire Western Hemisphere. That is, if the war could go in America's favor. On January 15, 2003, the Second Central American War began. The European Economic Community once again did not sit idly by. Continuing their previous operations, they financed, trained, and armed the indigenous people to withstand America's aggression. Their hope was not to directly contest the American military, but to make the invasion so costly that America would lose in the end. As a last-ditch attempt to maintain their power, the Gang of Four launched a full-scale invasion force into the inhospitable territories of Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela, fighting in a combination of jungle and mountainous terrain against the population. The hope for a swift victory quickly faded. The Gang of Four, desperate to maintain favorite support, hoped the war would restore their fading power. Instead, it only hastened their demise. Finally, after decades of assassinations, black operations, treason, and wars, the Gang of Four began to split apart due to new congressional laws and oversight. Additionally, in an army, CIA counter-coup, the Gang of Four would be ousted from power. The NSA was then purged with military force in March of 2004, and a return to civil governance was planned with acting President Newell believing the covert war had finally ended. But then, the assassination of Tesla Johansson by the NSA operatives in Cairo showed the agency still somewhat remained. In a final showdown, 4 years later, an NSA element hiding in Washington, D.C. would be discovered. In an overwhelming military response, the Gang of Four would at long last be eliminated, or so it seemed. The members of the NSA inner circle would never be located. Many believed this is in part due to these individuals siding with corporations for protection. Either way, the damage had already been done. The Second Central American War, over time, would go from major engagements to minor skirmishes to the American military withdrawing entirely, handing the EEC a second victory in South America. Re-elections would return to the United States, though it would be during a period of unrest, as many states had broken away from the Union to form the government-approved Free States program. Millions, across the decades spent battling the Gang of Four, were left dead. The legacy of the United States would be forever stained, and more war was yet to come. By 2022, the Fourth Corporate War, fought between Militech and Arasaka, was reaching its climax. At this time, the United States had lost its superpower status, participating in only minor conflicts and skirmishes over the decade. Its president, Elizabeth Kress, taking advantage of the ongoing war between her previous corporation and Arasaka, declared a state of emergency, essentially turning the American remnant into a dictatorship. These would be the early years of the new United States. While local elections resumed in the following years, there were no national elections. Most of the states in the Union were of the eastern states, while the western free states were autonomous of the federal government. Largely, aside from elections, the country still operated in the same political structure, except with most politicians being nothing more than former corporate executives. At the conclusion of the Fourth Corporate War, the United States nationalized Militech and banned Arasaka from the continent. This move essentially accomplished what Arasaka failed in the past by granting corporate rule over the entire country, as President Elizabeth Kress was also an ex-Militech president. The nationalization move allowed her to integrate Militech into the Department of Defense with all its assets, bolstering the American military. This move would be a prelude to war. West of the Mississippi River, from Seattle to Mexico, was the West Coast ruled by the autonomous free states. While they were free to rule themselves, they were unable to commit military forces to any major conflict. Therefore, to ensure their safety, they hired mercenaries and relied on local militias. To combine their few resources in a defense pact, the former states of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and what is now Northern California formed to make the Pacifica Confederation, though it was more of an economic pact than a militaristic one. By the 2050s to 2069, the new United States would remain quiet on the world stage. Elizabeth Kress's eventual successor, Rosalind Myers, enjoyed the employment of Militech at a high executive level. When the Militech CEO, Donald Lundy, passed away, Myers, a former Marine, would become its leader. She would remain in the position for almost a decade, overseeing the NUSA's rapid economic recovery. Her ascension to the presidency over the new United States would lead to a second American Civil War. After taking office, President Myers would present the free states with a unification program to extend federal rule over what she considered to be rogue states. As the free states opposed the unification program, the NUSA declared war on the free states, beginning the Unification War of 2069 to 2070. I've covered this period in lore previously, and a link to it will appear once this episode has concluded. At the war's conclusion, the Treaty of Unification would be signed to avoid escalating the conflict. At the risk of Arasaka's further involvement, the treaty required the free states to rejoin the Union, although not entirely under the banner of the new United States. The Republic of Texas was not included in this treaty, subsequently leaving it a target for Myers' ambitions. In the year 2077, a suicide bombing at an NUSA base in New Mexico and Oklahoma gave Rosalind the political approval she needed. She ordered the bombing of Texan air bases in Wellington and El Paso in retaliation. Not desiring war, Texas sued for peace. With Saburo Arasaka's death, the strength of Arasaka leadership had been damaged. Seeing this opportunity, President Myers had amplified her rhetoric as she seeks a third term under the banner "A Return to Unity." It would seem war soon would be inevitable as she seeks to restore America to its former glory on the world stage. The Gang of Four's de facto rule over America lasted decades. Ultimately, their attempts to retain power and to secure America's interests abroad caused the nation to collapse. In its place, the new United States rules dominant in its fragile union. With President Elizabeth Cress with dreams of restoring the superpower, the story is ongoing. Thank you for watching. If you watched this far, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a comment. And I'll see you next time.